will incorporate that because we want, besides people knowing about the book we're about to hear from tonight and the book being at Elliott Bay and all that, but what else is this is part of. So to everyone who is joining us from the various places near and far, we know several of us are on the West Coast. In fact, everyone you'll hear from tonight is actually on the West Coast, which is not always the case with us at Elliott Bay Book Company, which is on Duwamish land in the city of Seattle, and where the language preceding English and Spanish and other languages that are commonly heard here in Seattle now. But the Coast Salish language of Lushootseed is a language which continues, but it precedes some of the other more recent arrivals. And that's also, I think, of pertinence tonight, as you are going to hear from a newly published, newly translated book of poems whose title in English is In the Courtyard of the Moon, and they're by the late and very sadly recently deceased Guatemalan poet Humberto Ak'abal. And you're going to hear from the translator of that book, Miguel Rivera, and Seattle poet and past Seattle civic poet and past state poet laureate Claudia Castro Luna. I would, in many cases, keep going and say more about them, but the real other treat tonight is the person who knows, the other person who knows most about this book. You will instead be talking about it, and that is Luis Rodriguez, who is the publisher of Chucha Press, who is all himself a poet, a writer, incredible cultural critic and commentator. Books he's done over the decades, which have played a real vital role in all sorts of our aspects of our culture, but also is active in all sorts of ways. And he and Miguel and many others have been involved for years in many organizations and activities around youth and rites of passage, ritual work, poetry, language work, ceremonial work, but also the Tiacucha Cultural Center. And Luis, if you were here at the beginning of this, was saying a little bit about it. And some of us have visited there on visits for us to Los Angeles, and it's been an amazing place to see. And they've recently moved. And if you go to the Tiacucha website, which Karen probably has posted or will, you will see as you look at this whole group of younger people that Luis was just saying have taken so much on and really charged it in a way that they've been able to. The Tiacucha has just moved, it's expanding. So it's a bookstore, it's a community center. And at some point, Claudia, who's part of this reading tonight, who will have a new book of poems sometime next year from Tiacucha, will probably be among those reading there when we get to do that in person again. So I will remove myself from here, except to say again that Karen will be putting information in the chat about In the Courtyard of the Moon, the book tonight, Claudia's own other books that are around, and Luis's. And I will come back at the very end. But now to set this whole evening in motion, which is one we are thrilled and honored to be helping celebrate, because this is, I believe, the first of these, to the person who's actually the real one responsible for all these presences happening is the person I would gladly turn this over to, Luis Rodriguez. Thank you, Luis.
Thank you. What an honor it is to be here. Thank you. And I don't want to take up too much time because we really want to hear from Claudia and Miguel. I just want to say how Tiacucha is honored to do this book by Humberto Ak'abal, and my respect and gratitude to Miguel for bringing it to our attention. It actually took a while before we got to it, but I knew we had to do it. We finally did it. It's a beautiful book. Miguel did a great work with the translations, great work with the artwork. We have a great designer who incorporated what Miguel was putting forward, and we have this very beautiful book. And I've known Miguel for 30 years. I won't get into, but we did a lot of great work, including ceremonies together, and work with young people, and work with men's lives, and poetry, and we did a lot of good work. And I really appreciate the friendship that I have with Miguel. I also appreciate Claudia. She is not only, I knew about her, I knew about the work she's doing, but we met in a number of occasions. But when I saw her book, which is Chipotle Under the Moon, which we will have published by April, I was astounded, pleased, and very satisfied that we were able to get her to be one of our Chucha Press poets. She's done other poets. She can talk more about what she's done, but she's kind of chosen us, and we're very proud of that. Thank you, Claudia. So I just want to say that these two people are vital, important, and I'm going to open it up to them because one thing about Humberto Ak'abal and the work that me and Miguel includes a lot of indigeneity, a lot of ceremonies, but also connecting the Latino population to the indigeneity within our cultures. I've spent 40 years going to Central America, and I love the people, I love the land, but it's been forgotten. They don't get the due that they should. They get treated really badly. As you know, they're on the border, suffering tremendous pain, and their stories don't get told. And they've been in our country for such a long time. And I want to make sure that we could hear these voices, and from El Salvador, from Guatemala, Honduras, all the Northern Triangle countries, but really all the people that are here working hard, doing so much, and yet their stories are barely making a breakthrough. And we wanted the Chucha Press to help with those voices. So we're very honored to introduce the Quiché Mayan poet Humberto Ak'abal and this beautiful book, In the Courtyard of the Moon. So now what I'm going to do is turn it over to my good friend Miguel and my good friend Claudia to do this beautiful reading. Gracias, Lazo Kamati. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luis. As it takes vision to be able to publish a work like this. And I was so thrilled when you told me Pia Chucha was publishing a poet from Guatemala who'd penned these poems in the original Quiché, and that we are here tonight from that to being here tonight reading with Miguel Rivera, who translated the poems and we will read from them, is just an extraordinary thing. It really is an extraordinary moment to have the book, which is really gorgeous, and to have Miguel read the poems and inhabit this world, which you're right, there isn't enough. There just isn't enough. And a debt of gratitude to you, Luis, and Tia Chucha for publishing this book. So Miguel, tell us about, it's such an honor and a pleasure to meet you. And I think, I thought that we could start by you sharing and bringing Humberto Ak'abal into the room and telling us how you met, or, because you had a chance to meet him, right? Before we read some of the poems.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. My sister, who was a journalist in Guatemala, as a Christmas present in 1995, gave me one of his books, Guardián de la Caída de Agua. And the moment I started reading it, you're familiar with those little styrofoam dinosaurs that in the capsules, and you put them in water, they go. So that's what happened to me. I started reading the poems and all these incredible images about Guatemala and what the land is all about. They just exploded inside of me. And I remembered I had moved I'm from Guatemala originally, and I had moved here in 1966 when I was 13. So 30 years later, I come back and I started remembering all these things that I had forgotten. And it was a much, much deeper connection. When I was a kid, everything in Guatemala that was indigenous, at least in the dominant culture, was despised. And here we are 30, 40, 50 years later, and people are beginning to realize that there's an incredible treasure sitting there in the twilight, that has to be brought into the culture. So that's what happened. Humberto's poetry was like an incredible, I would say, a lightning bolt into the beauty that's in that culture. So I was working at the time with Robert Bly, and so on the fly, I would read the poems at the retreats that we were doing. And he said one day, we've got to do a book. So I called my sister up and I said, can you set up an appointment with Humberto? And she said, sure. So we met at a cafe in Guatemala City, right in the main square. And he said, we kind of like suss each other out. And we were about 10 minutes later, after a couple of cups of coffee, we're joking around as if we were two brothers. And the first thing he said to me, he took out a piece of paper and a pen, right? And he said, this is you. And he drew a line. And he said, this is me. And he drew a circle. You have to think about that for a while, and that's what I'm gonna say. And so I told him what we wanted to do, what we were up to, and he goes, "We're gonna make a prayer about it." And so about a month later, I got a fax. This is before emails were. I got a fax, and all the answer was "El fuego dijo que sí." He said the fire said yes. So that meant that he went, and what I really wanted him to do is go to his elders, to his ceremonial elders, and ask permission for this poetry to get out. And so the answer was the fire said yes. And then after that, we started working, and it took about 5 years to get the first anthology together. And then we brought him to the United States. We brought him here in 2001 for the first edition, and all. So that's how Humberto came to be, in a way. So, yeah.
Mm. I love that story. El fuego dice que sí, or el
El
fuego
fue-
dijo que sí. Wow. He was, I just looking through, learning about him, he was translated into German and French, Italian. So he was well translated in Europe, it seems.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, very well known. Traveled a lot. He taught in Germany, Switzerland, France, Italy, Spain. They took him. He even went to Japan. Spent time in Japan. So he's like, he spent time a
Yes.
lot in. Yeah.
There's
So
some of those poems.
yes,
Book.
yes, yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah.
yes. And Italy too. There's
Yes,
poems
yeah,
there.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 So
Yeah, no, that's an incredible story. I also love the story we shared it the first time we met, because these poems are, some of them, not all, but many of them are very short and very compressed. And it's incredible how in such a small poem, you have so many reverberations and echoes, and the people and the images are so strong and clear. There's a very clear voice in the poems, very powerful. I like that idea of the dinosaurs exploding inside you, because these poems kind of work that way. They're small and you read them and suddenly they're alive inside of you.
oh
Yeah, yeah. Do you want to read a poem and then come back and
yeah.
talk more? Yeah.
I would love to. And what I would like to do is I would like to, originally Humberto wrote his poetry in Quiché, and then he would translate them into Spanish. And then some of the poems, like the European poems, like the Venice poems, the Spain and Austria poems, and are all written in Spanish only, but the Guatemala poems are all in Quiché first. And so or someday in the future, I would like to see an edition where we have the three languages so you can compare. So I'm going to start by reading the first one in Quiché. And then I guess you'll read it in English, in Spanish, and then I'll read it in English.
Sounds good.
So this is for all of you, and I'd like to say thank you really for having me. Thank you to Luis, thank you to Rick, and thank you to Karen, and to you for taking the time to offer this space for Humberto to get out into the ethers, all right? Rikich, Rikich, Hunim Rib Chu Ushol Reshot, Rukri Uhanalik, Sha Karach Kuril, Hasko Chupan Rerik Kachoch. Ka sak makikare hampa kurilo, rukriu chach riu sakil, che sibalachsak ri kamebayil.
That's amazing. Wow. I could hear that again. I think we need to close tonight with that poem again.
All right. Yes,
It'd be
we will.
wonderful to close in that language. Thank you for reading it.
Yeah.
El sol. El sol se mete entre tejas con esa terquedad de mirar que hay dentro de nuestras casitas. Y se pone pálido al ver que con su luz es más clara nuestra pobreza.
The sun gets in between the roof tiles with that stubbornness of wanting to see what is inside our houses. And he goes pale on seeing that our poverty is more obvious in his light.
Yeah, I read that when I was moving along with the book. That poem just, these poems make you stop and just put the book down and just it just doesn't get any clearer than that, you know?
Yeah.
And especially if when I was a little girl, I'm from Western El Salvador. So from this town, Atiquizaya, where my dad lives, is 12 kilometers away from the Guatemalan border. So 12 kilometers is what, 6 miles. So we're essentially in the same geography.
Mm-hmm.
And because, and not a lot has changed from these little villages along the border. The volcanoes it's just very blue there because the vegetation is so thick. And I know this casitas, I know this small houses and how they're built, and you just so visual, so powerful. You could almost smell the earth, with these palms, and the way then the sun would filter through walls that are not brick, right? That are made with plants.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, what would you like to read next?
Why don't you let's go to De Rodillas. So that
De rodillas, okay.
Yeah.
¿Quieres que empiece en español?
Sí, empezar en español, por favor. Sí,
Okay.
claro.
So this is called De rodillas. ¿Por qué viniste a interrumpir mi vida? ¿Quién te envió? ¿Cómo has podido meterte en mi corazón? Ya no puedo arrancarte de mí. Ya no puedo vivir sin tu aliento. Ni siquiera puedo ponerme de pie. Poesía, ya ves, estoy de rodillas.
On my knees. Why did you come to interrupt my life? Who sent you? How were you able to get inside my heart? I cannot tear you out of me. I cannot live without your breath. I cannot even stand up. Poetry, I am on my knees.
So wonderful. I saw a video of Humberto. I think he did a lot of singing before his readings. Is that
Yeah.
fair to say? Yeah. So you saw him perform?
We did readings together. We brought him to the United States in 2001. So we did readings in the East Coast, in Maine, Indianapolis, San Francisco, and in LA. So we did about 6 or 7 readings of poetry. And here we did a couple here in LA, and he was great. He loved to sing. We were singing all the time. Just that's one way to let the pain, to transmute the pain that you feel, or the grief, the sadness, there's a lot of sadness in his poetry, and I feel like it gets elevated by being able to be expressed through the poetry or through the song.
Yeah, like that piece about the sun coming through, this happiness, this light, this beautiful light, this warmth, this life-giving force, and yet it also exposes the poverty. It exposes the lack and the pain as well. Yeah. Should we read Canto then?
Canto, let's go to Canto.
Talking about song?
Yeah.
Canto. El abuelo, de la mano, lleva a su nieto a saludar a los árboles, a platicar con ellos, a acariciar su piel, a oler sus hojas. Y los árboles cantan sus nombres.
Song. The grandfather takes his grandson by the hand to greet the trees, talk to them, feel their skin, smell their leaves, and the trees sing their names. And the trees sing their names.
Los árboles cantan sus nombres. Bellísimo. Yo enseño una clase sobre árboles. I teach a class, Miguel, about trees. And I'm teaching it again this next through a local nonprofit here. I love this. I love the sentiment in this song, how our interactions with nature and how nature is alive if we pay attention. If we listen to it, it will speak back.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a big thing that we've been discussing in some of the work that we do, because it's so critical to understand how powerful language affects the way we are. In English, like most people don't know this, but because it is a noun-based language, it objectifies everything. So we objectify ourselves and we objectify the world around us. And when we objectify things, the possibility of losing the mystery and the sacredness of what they are gets put in, effectively gets activated, you know. So we think of everything as an object, and the personal relationship is lost. And I think that's a really critical thing to be aware of, you know. So let's not lose that, you know. And I don't think Spanish to a degree has that, but it's not somehow. It's not as lost as it is with English, you know. So that to me is important, you know.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and the cultural component here, the grandfather is teaching the grandson how you do this, to go speak to trees, you know. I was at a store, at a local store here, buying flor de isote, what we call in El Salvador, we call it flor, which is a bitter flower that we eat. You have to, you know, it's a beautiful white flower, and we pick the pistils out to reduce the bitterness, but we love it. Salvadorans love isote. So I'm at a store here in Seattle, and there's isote there, and I'm mesmerized. So I want to buy some. And the kid who's stocking the shelves, this is at a Mexican market, is from Guatemala. And he says to me, my grandmother always said, we got to talking, and he said, yeah, my grandmother always sent me out to cut them because she always said that I was the sweet one, and you cannot be angry. You can't be angry when you go cut because you transfer your energy into blood, and then you get like more bitter flowers than you would otherwise get. And it was one of those encounters in the supermarket where I just stood there, you know, looking at this young man who was sharing essentially the essence of this poem as well, right? There is a relationship that we have with the natural world, and it's a give and take. I could make these flowers bitter. The plant would be angry with me and release some kind of extra bitterness into the isote, you know? It was very interesting and lovely to have that conversation with that young man. Yeah. All right, so La Lluvia.
La lluvia.
Okay, so 110. That's apropos, it's raining here. It's raining here in Seattle at this very second. So, La Lluvia. Cuando de noche llueve, las flores salen de paseo. Los árboles hablan de sus cosas de antes, y lloran.
The rain. When it rains at night, the flowers go out for a stroll. The trees talk about their concerns, things from long ago, and they weep. They talk about their concerns, things from long ago, and they weep.
Hablan de sus cosas de antes, y lloran.
So,
I like the way this, hablan de sus cosas, they talk about the things that pertain to them, their concerns, you say, cosas de antes, so long ago, right, that they've witnessed, and they weep. ¿Cuál quieres que leamos?
Ahora vamos a leer un poco de lo serio, ¿no? Dolor a flor de rostro sería bueno. ¿Qué te parece?
Sí, me parece. 50-51, okay.
50-50. So we made a tentative list for those that are listening, and so we're going to follow it a little bit. We're going to navigate a lot of different territories today all around the world, so through the eyes of Humberto.
Yes, and I have to say, Miguel, you, I had selected some poems that struck me, and for those of you who are here, and Miguel sent me his list, and it was very clear. Upon reading your list, who's very familiar with this book and who knows his way around it? I thought, oh yeah, let's go with Miguel's list. So much better. Yeah, and this is one of those poems that is longer than the ones that we have been reading, right? Dolor a flor de rostro. Ese es el que estamos leyendo, ¿no?
Sí.
¿Quieres que lo leamos de un solo o quieres que lea una
No,
estrofa?
léelo de un tiro, está
¿Un
bien
tiro?
así.
Ok,
Sí, sí, sí.
ok. Dolor a flor de rostro. Y otra vez la llama del recuerdo vuelve a encenderme la memoria. Con el dolor a flor de rostro, con la mirada hecha pedazos, mi gente con sus uñas escarba la tierra. Y la madre tierra descubre sus muertos y los huesos salen a gritar, a contar con voz de espanto el terror de esos días, de esos años, de ese siglo apenas terminado ayer. Y el viento desparrama el eco.
Ah, Camisanel.
Ah, Camisanel, ah, Camisanel, ah, Camisanel. Asesinos, asesinos, asesinos. Si los huesos de los muertos hablan, ¿por qué vamos a callar los vivos? Que su memoria se mantenga encendida y que la llama del recuerdo no se apague nunca. No más sangre, no más dolor, nunca más.
This is very current for us, for me in particular, in lieu of all the discoveries that have been made, in particular in this country, with all the boarding schools, especially after all the bones were found at the school in the East Coast. I forget the name right now, but so this is important to hear that pain blooms in the face. Once more, a flame returns and revives my memory. With pain blooming in the face, with a shattered gaze, my people, with their nails, dig into the ground, and the earth mother reveals her dead. The bones rise up to cry out, to tell as only the dead can, the terror of those days, of those years, of that century, barely over yesterday. And the wind scatters the echo. Ah, Camisanel, ah, Camisanel, ah, Camisanel. Murders, murders, murders. If the bones of the dead speak, how can we, the living, stay silent? May their memory stay alive, and may the flame of remembrance never go out. No more blood, no more pain, never more. And this was written at the side of an open grave in Nevaja in 2000, after they had exhumed the remains of all the hundreds of maybe thousands of Ixil Maya that were slaughtered by the army in Guatemala. So this is what this is about. So, yeah. So.
Those events, those exhumations are still happening today of those.
Oh, yeah.
In Guatemala, also in El Salvador.
El Salvador also, yeah. It's like Mexico, there's the Mexico, there are all those Ayotzinapa, this goes on. So it's not just there, right? And the boarding schools here. Yeah. So what I was going to say about these poems that we're going to read now, a lot of these were written about the war in Guatemala, 40 years of civil war. So there's a way in which sometimes people don't understand what the severity of that was, but he had a way of never succumbing to revenge, never succumbing to anger. What they had was grief, and they were able to express grief. And that's one of the things. We were together here in the United States when the towers blew up in 2001, the day we were getting ready to start a retreat. And he's shaking as we were watching the live coverage of the events, the planes going into the towers, and and he's going, oh my God, I remember all this. Because he used to talk about, how, I don't want to get into details, but how difficult it was to find dead people all over the streets in Guatemala on the roads. It was crazy for a while, But the main thing is to not to let that drive the bus, that reaction, but to move on. So anyway, so some of these are ways of expressing that it allows you to see it with a different eye, with a different sense, with the heart, and understand what the effects. So we should go to Viento Callado, right? 24, 25. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so because I'm seeing in the chat, before we read that, Miguel, Donna asking if it's possible to read another poem in Quiche, and we could come back to that. But
Yeah.
I wanted to. That was one of the questions I had for you. Is when you received the manuscript, because Humberto translated his own poems into Spanish, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So the working manuscript you had, was it both in Quiche and Spanish, or was it just in Spanish? How did that?
His books, his first editions were all in Spanish only. And then eventually, when there was enough interest, he started putting bilingual editions in Quiche and in Spanish. But not all his work is in Quiche and Spanish. So a lot of the poems, they're very strong. They're really beautiful. But there's not versions of all of them in Quiche. Only some of them. And I've been through this with his wife, Mayuli. We're in correspondence. So eventually, I would like to get as many of them as possible as in Quiche, so that we're working on that and make sure that all of them. So there are Quiche versions. I don't have them in hand right now. Originally, I had wanted to do a version where you could see all three languages, Quiche, Spanish, and English. But somewhere down the road, we'll find somebody that can, because the printing is complicated, but there's a way of getting around it. But it's really beautiful to see it in that way. So because you can,
yeah, and the poems that exist in the book too is really beautiful. Even the introduction of that word that I couldn't pronounce, murderers, asesinos, is wonderful to see that appear in the poem.
Mhm.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that more and more in Guatemala that is happening, that indigenous writers have more space. That's why this reading is so important, but also that they're being published in their language. I was just in El Salvador and I brought back this book, Al Centro de la Belleza, 6 poetas guatemaltecas, and one of them is Negma Coy, and
Mhm.
she's writing in Cachiquel. This little book has the poems in Cachiquel and in Spanish. And it is a feat actually to be able to get the print, right? Just like here with La Chutzi also. But it's wonderful to be able to see it. And just when you read it, that's why I think we have to close again with you reading it, because it's just marvelous. Yeah. Okay, so we go to, ¿cuál dijiste? Dolor del rostro.
No, viento callado, viento callado.
Viento callado, 24. Viento callado. Al día siguiente de lo que había ocurrido, el viento pasó callado. No se atrevía a contar lo que había visto. El miedo caminaba en el aire. Así amaneció aquel día cuando la guerra llegó a estas tierras.
Silent wind. The day after it happened, the wind went by quietly. It did not dare tell what it had seen. Fear walked in the air. That is how the day began, when the war came to these lands. Yeah.
A poem of witness here telling us what it was like. Oof.
Yeah.
And it didn't leave. It was 50 years of war.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and it's still, I mean, it hasn't, it's still going on. It just transmuted it. Like people got used to it. They got habituated to that way of life. And I think that the restoration of humanity to the people is important, in some form or another. And this is one way to do it, through art and through prayer and through, asking questions, telling stories.
Yeah, I agree. I think in El Salvador, peace accords in Guatemala were in 95. The peace accords in El Salvador were in 92. But, the war is still raging. It's just morphed into something. It's morphed itself, but it's still there.
Yeah.
Agree. So there's a question in the chat actually about what book we're talking about. Miguel, do you want for people who join us later, do you want to see?
Yes. We're reading today from In the Courtyard of the Moon, which is an anthology in English of the poetry of Humberto Ak'abal, published by Chucha Press, and it's available, I think, through the links in the bookstore that is hosting at Elliott Bay Book Company, and also if you have to go to TiaChuchaPress.org, just tiachucha.org, I think is what it is. But Humberto, for those of you that do not know, is a Maya Quiche poet from Guatemala Unfortunately, he left us 2 years ago. It's a complicated story, but he was a treasure, and he was definitely a shape-shifting force in being able to understand the beauty that lives inside of us and how we can share it so we can create community, a larger community, getting to know each other. So I think we should go to 2021, since they're talking about the book, right? It's just,
Yes.
yeah.
En Los murciélagos y yo, dices.
Sí,
Yeah.
sí, claro, claro.
Los murciélagos y yo. Los murciélagos y yo esperábamos la llegada de la noche para jugar con las estrellas en el patio de la luna.
Yeah, this is Humberto at his best, showing you how to see the world around you, right? The bats and I. The bats and I waited the arrival of the night to play with the stars in the courtyard of the moon.
I love that. And the cover, you were telling us
Yeah.
about can you tell us again a little bit about the cover?
There are ruins in Guatemala in a town called Huehueten, right outside of Huehuetenango. It's called Sac Uleu. Uleu in Maya is earth, and Sac is like holy earth, sacred earth. So my family and I, we went there in 1995 just to remember what it was like. So my brother took a picture in one of the temples in Sac Uleu, and that's what it is. But what I love about it is that you're seeing through one layer into another layer, like a portal into a different dimension. And one of the things that you understand, I understood it much later. In Guatemala, there are two existing cultures that have been lived in Paris, like two different dimensions, the native dimension, right? And then the colonization dimension. And everybody talks about decolonize, decolonize, decolonize. And well, yeah, but what does that actually mean? So that means that you have to really change the way in which you perceive and understand the world around you. So you just have to stop for a moment and see what's really there. In Guatemala, the names of all the places, the foods that you eat in many places are all in native languages. So you're already involved in it, but you just don't realize because it's been taken for, so it's embedded in you. When I went to Spain the first time in 1999 to work, in Latin America, you always hear La Madre Patria, La Madre Patria, La Madre Patria. And so I landed, and the first time I was there, I heard this voice in my head, Usted no es de aquí, usted es de allá.
Mhm.
You are not from here, you're from over there. Meaning, and what I saw, I kid you not, what I saw in the marrow of my bones, see these patterns on the shirt that I'm wearing? This is how I saw my marrow, like that, like all those, and I realized, oh, the earth owns us in some form or another. So how what amnesia kicks in that allows us to forget how we are connected to the world that we live in. And this is, he's enabled, in my experience with him, we were talking about this earlier, is I love the fact that connected me to some deep, deep, deep root that's in me. And I think we all have that. We all have a root that takes us to source. So the question is how to get there, how to find it. So
Language is
language, yeah.
definitely. I think in Guatemala, it's true. You look at a map of Guatemala, all the place names are indigenous names.
Yeah.
And there's more than one language there as well. Of course, indigenous language. There's many, and that all is part that seeps into us. It's just. Sometimes it takes somebody putting a mirror up or showing the way or publishing a book like this one where we begin to take consciousness of it, for sure.
Yeah.
So Miguel, how did you learn because if I were to read that Quiche, I wouldn't know where to start, right? But you do. So did you speak as a child, or?
You go to the markets in Guatemala, that's all you hear. Everybody bargaining for you go. It's like being in a beehive, and all you hear is everything's in Quiche. And where I grew up, there's a little sliver of Quiche, but the most of the part of Quetzaltenango is mam. But there's a difference between mam and Quiche, right? But that's all you would hear. The guys that used to come and be with us, part of my family is I have a great grandfather that's Quiche. So you just hear it everywhere. So and you realize, oh, that's what this is. I've been living this all my life, but I just took the time to figure out how to pronounce it because you have to think differently and feel differently. The accent is always on the last syllable, and the vowels are very similar as in Spanish. only one sound for A. Oh, they're all the same. A, E, I, O, U, right?
Mhm.
But the glottal stops is where you get confused, you know. But
Yeah.
so I practiced, and I would hear Humberto. The last time I saw him was in 2017. We went to Momostenango, hung out with him all day. The thing that we did, we went to the market in Momostenango and hung out there took my son, Tomas, and we just sat there and ate and listened. And it's like a hive of quiche everywhere. And he would just go, ah, and take it in.
Yeah.
So, and that's,
Dissolve yourself in the language. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's read the next one. What would you like to read?
Oh, you know, we
La
should read
respuesta.
La Respuesta. No, I want to wait. I want to do that. But let's do La Respuesta. Sure. Yeah, I like that one. Yeah.
Ah, está al final del libro, la respuesta.
Sí.
Es como, has leído el libro y aquí está mi respuesta.
Sí, exactamente, para que no se le olvide a la gente que así es como se hacen las oraciones. En lugar de ir a la iglesia, vamos afuera a escarbar. Sí.
Exacto, sí, es como no te olvides. La
Ujú.
respuesta es no te olvides.
Ujú.
La respuesta. Abrir la tierra con las manos, llenarse de su aroma, levantar el rostro al cielo y comer el aire. Esa es la paz, respondió la abuela.
The answer. Open up the earth with your hands. Get filled with its scent. Raise your face to the sky and eat the wind. That is peace, the grandmother said. That is peace, the grandmother said.
Eat the wind.
Eat the wind. Eat the wind. Yeah.
Love that. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, and that is the closing poem in the collection.
Yeah, in the collection. Well, I had the other one too. Actually, I had one
Oh, lo tienes enterrado.
Mukunahik, yeah.
Yeah. ¿Quieres leerlo?
Sí, lo voy a leer ahorita, sí.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lo vas a empezar, lo lees en quiché primero.
Quizá hoy tú español, después yo lo leo en inglés.
Okay. Yeah, so here comes a trilogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Miguel.
Mukunahik. Shinwok rinutat, arehampa shinwaraj ri ukaminakil. Sinokik arehampa shuyakan ri rachoch. Arekuk shkakam ri be shorihum. Chila shinchabek kanok. Shinlan ri blis. Are sinkastalik pa numebayil. Shubi nukutel chi shinwe tamach. Che we hun ukutel kakanahik. Rajawa shik kumukanok. Konogel ri keshkol rimam katob tach. Re che rilik ri uk aslemal hun.
Enterrado. Lloré a mi padre mientras velaba su cadáver. Lo lloré cuando el féretro salió de casa. Caminó al cementerio y ahí le dije adiós. Hice el duelo y al amanecer en mi orfandad me vi solo y comprendí que para vivir solo necesitaba dejar enterrado con él todo el dolor que me impidiera seguir viviendo.
Buried. I wept for my father during his wake. I wept when the coffin went out of the house on the way to the cemetery, and there I said goodbye. I mourned, and when I awoke as an orphan, I saw myself alone and understood that to live, I only needed to leave buried with him all the pain that could stop me from living. I only needed to leave buried with him all the pain that could stop me from living. Yeah. No, we should read Color de Sol. Color de Sol.
Sí, eso es una, creo, de los que yo también había escogido. Ok,
Sí,
Color de
sí,
Sol. Y después podemos tal vez abrir un poco a
sí, sí.
preguntas. ¿Qué te
Claro,
parece?
claro.
Ok, Color de Sol. Color de Sol. El jaguar es un animal de color de sol, con parches negros. Su cola se alarga hasta la orilla del sueño. Este animal a veces llora.
Color of the Sun. The jaguar is an animal the color of the sun with black patches. His tail stretches out to the edge of the dream, and sometimes this animal weeps. Yeah.
This is one of my favorite poems in the book.
Oh, yeah.
I love that. Su cola se alarga hasta la orilla del sueño.
Mm-hmm.
Este animal a veces
Just
llora.
llora. Yeah.
You know, he knows that. The writer knows this.
Yeah.
This animal weeps,
Yeah.
like I weep, right? Like we weep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's lovely. Yeah, so it's 6:48, so maybe, I don't know if people have questions, but Miguel, I'm sure, would be happy to answer any questions you might have about translation or just Guatemala, or the book. And then I think, Miguel, before we close, hearing you read one more time in Quiche would be wonderful.
I'd be happy to, yes, yeah.
Donna has a question, and she's asking if Humberto was more known in Europe than in the US, and if so, why might that have been?
Yes, he was more known in Europe than in the United States. For some reason, there was because of the impact that the United States military operations had in Guatemala all those years. That was when he was not necessarily, he was intimidated by coming to the United States. But there's also not a recognition of native people, in particular from Guatemala and the United States also as well. He was fortunate enough that for some reason he took him wherever the poetry took him. So for some reason he got invited to go to Italy and then to France. His wife for many years is from Switzerland, so they were able to travel and do get some recognition in Switzerland. So, and I think the Europeans have a lot more interest in things of that nature than sometimes people in the United States. And I think that's it's a sad thing, but that's how it happens. So now we're trying to get this to happen. Our first attempt was in 2001 with the first anthology. Now this is like the second attempt, so we're getting to do it a little bit more to get him better known.
And is his wife in Guatemala, or is
she's in Switzerland right now? Yeah.
I saw that he had won a poetry award he won several awards.
Yeah.
He was recognized. Oh, here it is. He was given the culture department an award by Neuchâtel in Switzerland.
Yeah.
And the Canto de América Prize in Indigenous Literatures by the House of Indigenous Writers in Mexico City. And he was well loved in Guatemala. I got he really opened up spaces for other indigenous writers in Guatemala. So that's kind of the sense I get.
Yeah.
Any, I don't know if there's any other questions there. I don't see. Somebody wanted us to reintroduce ourselves, which we did. And Karen has put in the chat the details of the book from Tia Chucha, as well as from the publisher, as well as from Elliott Bay Book. It's a beautiful book. We haven't even talked about the pages of the book have a photograph. It's a recurring. You can't really appreciate it through Zoom. You just see the blank pages, but there is a faded images, right, of the same ruins, and inside the pages it's very designed.
Even like for instance, like the first poem in the book, I'll read that one right now because it's very short, ¿Para quiénes? En la página 18, ¿no?
Sí, léelo en las ambas
De- de-
lenguas, Miguel. Lo puedes leer en las dos
Claro,
lenguas.
claro, claro, claro. ¿Para quiénes? Para quienes no hablan nuestras lenguas, somos invisibles. For those, for those who do not know, for those who do not speak our languages, we are invisible. And you have to think about that. I shared this poem with a friend of mine that lives in France, and she wrote back. In this, there's like a whole implicate there in that very simple statement about how a whole level of humanity gets ignored, right? Taken for granted, marginalized because we don't understand their languages. We don't want to be bothered to learn their languages. So
Mm.
there's a whole implicate there that's in just a very simple phrase. So, yeah.
Yeah, yes, and many of his poems work that way. Folks want to know if you have translated other poets, Miguel, and how much, if you know, how close is the relationship between you and the writer you're translating?
Well, I had the good fortune of spending a lot of time with Humberto. We would hang out. We would, we would drink beers together. We would go out and have food together. He stayed at my house for a couple of weeks when he was here in 2001, and we would visit him in Guatemala. So there was an intrinsic friendship there. And I know with some of the other living poets, it's not impossible. Like a lot of people translate Neruda, for instance, or they translate Machado or Lorca, right? Just because they love it. And I think what helped me with him is I understood the culture. Like when you read the poems, automatically I smell Guatemala. I smell the wood fire. I hear if you grew up in Guatemala, you know what this is, right? That's the sound of the women or the people making tortillas in the house, and that's just that sound alone. The wood smoke, the nixtamal, the dough, the corn dough, getting up in the morning to grind the corn, hearing the sound. I used to get up at 4 in the morning when I'd go spend time in my uncle's plantation. Get up at 4 in the morning and listen to the cacophony of birds, which, by the way, it doesn't exist anymore because all that part has been leveled, all the trees have been cut. So you don't hear that anymore in many parts of the country. So, but all those, when I would read those poems, that's what comes to my mind immediately. So I'm transported into a world and I know many people don't have that, but that's how powerful that poetry is. Even if you don't know it, you get caught in that implicate, of what it brings about. So
Mhm.
there's that memory stored in there.
In El Salvador, because the airport is not in San Salvador, is on the outskirts, and you land the plane. Lots of planes are red eyes, and you get out of the airport at 5 in the morning, and birds are waking up, and it's incredible. The sound of bird song immediately getting off the plane is just, you're surrounded by it, and so much of it has been lost, of course. There is another question. If there are other poets who are also writing in Quiche, Miguel, that are translated.
Not that many. There are several of my. I can't remember the names right now, but there's a couple that my sister keeps sending me books, and there's more and more writers coming out. And it's just like you mentioned, there was a Cachiquel poet that's writing in Cachiquel. There's a Canjoal poet, and there's a woman from I forget what Maya group she's in, but she lives in Mexico, right in Chiapas, but she's writing in Maya too. So there's more poetry coming, and I think it's great. Quiche, all the Maya languages, when you do all the ceremonies, the ceremonies are all poems. They're structured poetically. Even the Popol Vuh, which is the Maya creation story, right? It's shared by all the Maya groups. When you read the original version, we were working on this, Humberto in particular, because the original version is written in a poem form. Like it would be, I don't want to equate it in any way, shape, or form, but the structure is very different than the Iliad or the Odyssey. But the prayers, all the prayers, when you hear the prayers, when they're doing all the day counting ceremonies and everything, they're all in poems. There's a rhyming structure to everything. So the language itself is all poetic. The way they tease each other, the way they talk to each other, the way they bargain in the market is all. It's like basically it's very poetic. So it's built into the language itself.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I think there's a lot of interest in the chat to know who other poets might be, or how to get our hands in those books.
There is a great song. There's a great anthology put out by, I can't remember the name of it right now. You would have to forgive me because my mind is so focused on this, but I forget what the name of the anthology is, but it's got a great collection of Native American poetry from this country, from the United States, and also from some from Mexico, some from Central America, and from South America. I'll put my memory search, because right now I didn't want to get distracted, but there are several anthologies. There's one put out by Joey
Yeah.
Harjo, that is somebody just sent it to me. That's primarily native from this country, but it's got some Pan-Pacific stuff, and there's another introduction. So there, like if you look at if you start looking up Deborah Miranda, who's a Native American poet from the United States who lives here in California somewhere. Her poem is in one of these anthologies, so there are anthologies around. There's not that many, but there are some anthologies, and
Can
of
I
course,
can I
yeah,
come in on this?
yeah, Luis, yeah.
Again, just really quickly, because you guys have powerful reading, but this is such an important point. Deborah Miranda is also at the Chucha Press poet.
Oh, great.
Yes, and we know her very well. And what I think the point, really strong point, and it puts a contradiction to the imprisonment of the nation state. The people on the border are indigenous people, whether they know it themselves or not. And it's changing the whole dialogue about who are migrants and who are not, who are immigrants and who are not. And I think that's what the Mexican Central American diaspora represents. And it changes even the cosmological issues that we're seeing in this country. Day of the Dead is a cosmological clash to Halloween and other things. In other words, the indigenous is coming back through the South, even though there's indigenous people in this country who are also rising up, who are also speaking out, and their languages are starting to be heard. I just want to mention that so that people know the reason why the Chucha Press and others are interested in these voices is because they tear apart that whole colonial idea that borders and nations are sacred and above everything else. We didn't have them, they were created recently. These are indigenous people coming back to the land. And I just want to mention that and make sure people understand why we have to publish and do whatever we can to get these voices out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Luis. I was thinking of the writer, the Guatemalan writer, Luis de Leon, who wrote an amazing book, El Tiempo Principia en Xibalbá. And this is a short novel. I have it here. It's an amazing book, but it's not translated into English. I mean, so I think that, to the question, there is all of, that's going back again about why this book is so important. It's because you have to have a vision to publish. Otherwise, these books exist, but the distribution is very small and they're not yet in English, and so et cetera, et cetera. So thank you, Luis, for your words. I think Karen put the book you were referring to, Miguel, in the chat. The Joy Harjo's book, When the Light of the World Was Subdued, Our Songs Came Through, from Norton, a Norton anthology of Native Nations poetry. So somebody else has listed Victor Montejo, and the woman I was talking about today is Negma Coy. I'll put it in the chat as well. I don't know if her work isn't Cachiquelian in Spanish, so I don't know that it exists in English. But it's, keep insisting, right? Keep creating spaces for us to, this is a loss to us, not to have.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I took it upon myself on my own. Humberto had about close to 20 plus poetry books that he put out. And so I've already done all the translating. I have a pile of manuscripts. And right now I'm currently working on the Popol Vuh. He said to me, he had his own version, he had his own paraphrasing of the Popol Vuh. So he said to me, Dale una pasada a esto, mano, por favor. So, and he said, but you can't just tackle the Popol Vuh because it's like Luis was saying, that's a tall order, but and it's a very sacred thing. But everything that we do should be approached with that kind of. And to me, there's a responsibility when you're going to do the translation to really do it in a form that it maintains some of the integrity, you know. I've had like we were talking about this, you and I, Claudia, a lot of my Neruda books and my Chalo books and Lorca books are all filled with scribbles because of the way that a lot of the translators are not familiar with the nuances, not only of Spanish, you know. So, but imagine going from a native language to Spanish and into English. So somewhere in there, you have to figure out how to maintain that essence of the poetry. So I had Humberto write a dedication when we did the first anthology, which is in this book, about how the translations are done with how to keep the spirit of the poetry alive through the translation so they wouldn't get lost. And that was always our prayer, that it would maintain something, because it's about a deeper connection to the mystery that we are as beings, right? Human beings in a community, larger community of beings. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that comes through in the book.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Yeah. Would you like to read for us again one
Yeah.
last poem in Quiche? That would be
You
wonderful.
wanna we could do El Sol again, right? It's 58. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's 58. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going there. El Sol. Rikih kunim rib, chu ushol rishot. Ruk riu hanalik sha karach kuril. Hasko chupan re rikachoch. Ka sakmakika re hampakurilo. Ruk ri uchach ri usakil. Che sibalachsak re ri kamebayil. El
¿Lo quieres
sol.
dejar ahí? ¿Lo quieres dejar ahí o quieres leer la traducción?
No, dejémoslo. ¿Qué te parece? Lo dejamos así.
A mí me parece así.
Vaya.
Perfecto. Sí. Nos quedamos con las palabras de Humberto.
Sí,
Gracias
claro,
por
claro.
ti, Miguel.
Gracias a ti. Gracias a ti. Y Luis, muchísimas gracias a ti. I also want to say thank you to all of you for coming tonight and taking time out of your life to listen to us banter for a little bit, talk Earth stories, you know, listen, share the song of the Earth, because that's what I feel. These are the song of the Earth. So,
That's beautifully said. Thank you, Miguel.
Yeah.
Gracias, Luis,
gracias.
por tu visión.
Gracias a todos.
Y Rick and Karen, thank you for having us and creating this space for us. It's been wonderful.
It's been our huge pleasure and honor. I only wish I could say it in more languages, including Lashutsi, because it feels like Lashutsi has been listening to this tonight too, and poets and voices of this part of the world having this come in. But thank you all, Miguel, Luis, Claudia, for this evening and for bringing us Humberto's work and vision and versions of the world, which I think everyone here, if we were in the same room, that the energy of these words would be palpable, but it's actually palpable even over these crazy screens. I know I feel it here on the same kind of rainy night that Claudia is knowing here in Seattle. But we thank you, and this evening is coming to an end, but a night like this also feels like a beginning, or at least a continuation of something that's really ongoing. And this is a nice and beautiful marker. Wherever this goes, I think everyone who's been part of tonight will be carrying it. And thank you so much, Miguel. It's been a great pleasure to have you do this, and Luis and Claudia all. So thank you, truly. And
Thank you, everybody.
beautiful.
Buenas noches.
Buenas
Peace out.
Yes.
Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.